There has been, of course, as you all heard about why us experts have been unable to predict the Arab Spring. But I think there is also a more significant question about also why we didn't predict the Islamist turn in the Arab Spring, especially since our friend Hosni Mubarak has been telling us this even before, until the last breath he had, and also Zain Abdin bin Ali. All of them have been saying that if we go, it will be the Islamists and it will be catastrophe. And I think there was, of course, some evidence. I remember when we were commenting on the 2005 elections, where the Muslim Brotherhood won about a quarter of the seats of parliament, of course, in the teeth of very determined government attempts to stop them doing that. But if you look closer at the statistic, the Muslim Brothers actually won 2/3 of the seats they contested. We at that time we were discussing this. We projected this and said that, of course, that means if they run for the full seats in parliament, they'll probably have got at least half. And of course, but we all, I think, did not think, let's put it this frankly, didn't think that they will get that far, especially since the Islamists themselves were not very keen to actually push for power. And I recall, for example, an interesting thing when Sheikh Rashid Al-Ghanouchi, the leader of the Tunisian Islamist movement, was returning from exile after 2 decades in London. He and his followers tried to make a lot of effort in choreographing his return so that it doesn't look like Khomeini's return, because they were worried that people will make the comparison. And the regime, the government of the time of his namesake Mohammed Al-Ghanouchi, also discreetly put a request that they should keep low profile, because they were worried about the destabilization at that time, in the early time of their return. But so when he was returned, he delayed his return until to give the government time, and he gave also a number of interviews before going, saying that he will not run for any post, and that he and his party do not want to have an Islamic state in Tunisia. They only want democracy. And also he was strenuously saying we had nothing to do with the uprising. We, like everybody else, took part of it, but we were not behind it. We were not its leaders. We were not instigators. And of course, he wore a suit when he went to Tunisia, so as not to wear traditional garb, all to make the distance between himself and Khomeini. But it didn't work out, because tens of thousands of people, of his followers, turned out at the airport to meet him. And that was also symbolic of what happened after that, in the sense that whatever we say, no other politician, whether exiled or local, could get 10,000s of people to come and greet him at the airport. So it was clear from that, whatever the efforts of the Islamists to keep a low profile, they couldn't. And I think there was an interesting also dimension in the attempt to distance himself from Khomeini. Because I remember when I visited Tunisia in the mid-1980s, the students, the Islamist students at the university, were fascinated by two movements and events. The Iranian Revolution and the Islamic movement in Sudan, especially Turabi. But also indicative of this, their interest in the Iranian Revolution mainly was about the works of Ali Shariati, so the intellectual rather than. And their interest in Turabi was relating to Turabi's pragmatic ideas, especially his defense of the right of women and his defense of democracy at that time. So, but in the last 2 decades, the Islamists in Tunisia and elsewhere have spent a lot of energy and time trying to distance themselves from these two models, from the Islamists in Sudan and from the Iranian Revolution, because of the disastrous, actually, trend both of them has taken. But the way I think things have turned up in Tunisia and also in Egypt and in Morocco as well indicates that the problem with the Islamists is that what happened, the rise they got, was not something they planned for and was not something they desired at this moment, which is troublesome because we have earlier 2 incidents where this happened in Algeria and also in Palestine by Hamas. In both cases, the Islamists got a windfall of support which they didn't actually work for it. By the time the FIS won the landslide in the election, it had only been 2 years in existence. And actually all its leaders were in prison at that time. So it had nothing to do with MIGA, they could say that. And the same thing happened in Palestine in the 2002 election, in the sense that the victory of Hamas was not something they wanted. And we had a number of conferences here at the University of Westminster, a number of them since 2006, where we actually invited these Islamist leaders and tried to ask them these questions, to confront them with the idea that what happens if you come to power? And at that time, their strategy was, we don't want to come to power. We would like to have coalitions. Would like to play from the back seat. We would not even campaign for a majority in parliament. But I think what is important is that the Islamist trend is something which is not at the moment to do with the Islamist movements as such. There is a trend in the society which has grown beyond the Islamists. And for example, in Egypt, we noticed that the Western powers for a long time have been boycotting Ikhwan and other Islamist movements, claiming that these groups all Islamists are potentially extremists and all extremists are potentially terrorists. So if you want to have a war against terror, don't talk to Islamists because you will give them legitimacy. And now, we look at the map, the Ikhwan, whom are now look like the moderate, the Salafis now emerging. And the Western governments are out of breath trying to catch up with the many years they have refused to talk to Ikhwan. Now they're trying to talk to them all the time. But I think that there is the first point is that Islamism has not much at the moment of the Islamic trend. The rise we see in the Islamists has something beyond the Islamist movement as movements. And actually also even in Egypt this is not new. In Egypt, when the Islamist trend emerged in the 1970s, the Jama'at al-Islamiyya, also at that time the Muslim Brotherhood was in prison, and its leadership was either in exile or in prison. These trends was emerged actually spontaneously from the universities, mainly in South Egypt, and then the Ikhwan later cashed in on it and got some of the members of these groups to join the Ikhwan like a franchise. So when we are studying, I think, these groups, we have to look at the trend as something beyond the Islamist groups as groups. The Islamist groups may benefit from it, just as they have benefited from the revolution, but they are not in control. And I think we worry because at the moment their strategy has been a negative one, not a positive one. And in this, we have to contrast them with the Turkish Islamists, who did actually take over responsibility for the state, for society, by coming out with a program which is feasible. The problem of the Islamists at the moment is that they don't have a practical and feasible program. Their policy is wait and see. There has been progress, and I don't have the time to go into this, but my title of Revolution Within Islamism denotes that actually the Islamist movement, the other point is that the Islamist movement which has emerged are actually new kind of movements. They are not in the sense Islamist. Even Hamas, for example, in Gaza is not Islamist in the sense that they are not busy enforcing this kind of Islamist rules or moves. They are more. Their question is a political question. They are just a kind of political group which is different from Fatah by being more hardline. That's the only main thing. But there has been change, and the change has been inspired in part, again, partly by the Islamic Revolution's second spring. I mean, the Khatami years, there has been an important change and a spring in Iran which was promising, and people thought you could have an Islamist democracy. But then that went, but it has inspired. And the second, the Turkish model. So there has been some progress, but if I were to conclude, I would say that this progress has not been sufficient, that these movements have not been radical enough, assertive enough, and we have what I call an absent-minded now Islamic revolution taking place. These groups are taking over, they don't know what to do, they are struggling with it, they are transforming themselves into just kind of, especially in Tunisia, into just democratic movements, which is well and good, as the Turks have done. But if they don't get their act together, there will be trouble for everybody. Thank you very much.